We're going to get started. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Debbie Liu, and I am the associate at Metropolitan Planning Council. MPC is an independent nonprofit change organization committed to creating a better, bolder, more equitable Chicagoland region. This webinar is put together with Enterprise Community Partners, which is a national nonprofit aimed at creating opportunities through affordable housing. This is the third webinar of the series where we delve into housing issues in the face of COVID-19. Our first one had highlighted different concerns and responses to the pandemic early on. And our second and last one had been focused more on immigrant housing as it relates to this public health crisis of COVID-19 and of the racial uprising. Today's conversation has been one that we've been following. MPC's own Director of Research, Dan Cooper, has written about the complexity of this issue back in April, highlighting the Russian roulette that people who are held and staff in jails have to play. With close quarters that make it very difficult to spatial distance, there were hundreds of cases spreading and some even resulting in death, making an early COVID-19 hotspot. I'm going to pass it on to Chandra from Enterprise, who will talk more about this issue and then introduce our moderator and to provide some more logistics about the webinar.
Thanks, Debbie. Everyone, my name is Chandra Christmas-Rouse, and I'm a program officer here at Enterprise Community Partners in the Chicago office. I again want to welcome everyone to this event. As Debbie mentioned, this conversation is the third in a series that we've been co-hosting with MPC. And the goal of this is really about creating an equitable response and recovery that centers those most impacted by the injustices that COVID-19 has exacerbated and amplified. Today, we will learn about what is happening right now and the gaps in the current system that justice-involved residents are experiencing. And this work is really intended to help us recover in a way that works for all residents. We also want to acknowledge and respond to the sustained and increasingly visible violence against Black communities in Chicago and globally. We stand in solidarity with the movement for Black lives and recognize the shared struggle to dismantle racism and all forms of oppression in the housing and criminal justice system. Again, I want to encourage everyone to use the chat function to introduce yourselves for this conversation. We will also be taking questions towards the end, so please use the Q&A function to ask any questions that you have of our panelists. And all participants will be muted, and Debbie and I will be monitoring the Q&A. We also encourage you all to engage with live tweeting that MPC's page will be doing on Twitter. And this conversation will be recorded and featured on MPC's website as well as Enterprise's Facebook page. I would now like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Floyd Stafford from Heartland Alliance. Floyd will be joined by Destiny Carter from Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, Sharon Mitchell Jr. from the Illinois Justice Project, Lisette Castañeda from Lucha. Floyd will offer opening remarks about the urgency of this discussion and introduce our panelists. Again, after the panel discussion, we'll open it up for questions from you all. And Floyd, thank you again for leading this conversation, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chandra. Once again, I'm Floyd Stafford. I'm a senior project manager with Heartland Alliance. So I'd like to just take a moment to provide a little bit of background on this issue. People with records are commonly denied housing from both private market landlords and public housing. This occurs even with minor offenses and offenses that are years old. In the private rental market, application processes often screen out applications with any record, and even dismiss charges and arrests without convictions can show up on background checks. On the federal level, federal laws restrict people with certain types of criminal records, most notably drug offenses, from living in public or subsidized housing. This regulatory infrastructure for subsidized housing, it allows public housing authorities significant discretion that can lead to undue burdens on people with records, including long look-back periods, considering arrest without convictions as criminal activity, and inconsistently considering mitigating circumstances. Given the disproportionate impact of criminal records on people of color, the housing-related collateral consequence or permanent punishments, they contribute to racialized patterns of housing instability segregation, and homelessness. Affordable housing is already in short supply, even for those low-income individuals without criminal records. The combination of housing and employment permanent punishments keep many people with records in poverty and put them at risk of homelessness. At the same time, the experience of homelessness, it puts people at risk of criminal legal system involvement. People experiencing homelessness may incur records by simply trying to survive. In many jurisdictions, activities are criminalized, like sleeping in public urination, panhandling. More than half of people experiencing homelessness, they report having been incarcerated at some point in their lives, with people of color experiencing homelessness having incarceration histories at higher rates than white people experiencing homelessness. So now I'd just like to have this conversation, and I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. We have Destiny Carter, Sharon Mitchell, and Lizette. And I'm going to let you all, just say a few words, an opening statement about this issue. So we can start with Destiny.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Destiny Carter, and I am a policy specialist with the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. In addition to that, my role places me in the Rocky Coalition, which is the Restoring Rights and Opportunities Coalition of Illinois, where I work with policy advocates like myself, grassroots leaders, and community organizers to collaborate together to create policies on a state level that influence change for people with criminal records. As Floyd already mentioned, people experiencing homelessness, 50% or more have records. And so that puts me in a unique position to really address those issues head on, working with both CCH and the Rocky Coalition. Right now with the Rocky Coalition, we're working on two bills, one on employment and the other on housing, our public housing access bill, which really relooks at criminal background review and changes the way that criminal backgrounds are reviewed in order to remove those barriers and get people back on their feet. CCH is also working on a city-led campaign, Bring Chicago Home, and a fair tax campaign on the state level to utilize taxes and redistribute them to address homelessness on a more consistent and steady level, especially given COVID-19. Right now, we are seeing increasing numbers of people applying and requesting for financial assistance as it relates to housing, which gives us fear that a lot more people are going to be experiencing homelessness. Knowing that reentry already has significant barriers to housing, I am particularly looking at folks with criminal records and increasing their likelihood to get housing because we know that they are one of the most vulnerable populations that will be affected by this COVID-19 pandemic. That's it for me. I'll pass it over to Sharon.
Hey y'all, my name is Sharon Mitchell Jr. I work for an organization called the Illinois Justice Project, and we work on supporting people and programs and policies that can reduce inappropriate incarceration, improve community safety outcomes, reduce recidivism, and make the justice system just a little bit fairer. We tend to be a very opportunistic organization, so we find ourselves in lots of different buckets, and housing has become an emerging piece for our work. We authored a report with our friends at Metropolitan Planning Council, reentry issues in housing, that you can find on the ILJP or the MPC website. That really is a great outline of the issues that folks who are incarcerated face when they're returning from incarceration. Housing, as everybody knows on this call, is a fundamental need, and folks who are returning from home from incarceration, whether it be jail or prison, or suffering through the noose that is our criminal records, really face some unique issues. So I'm really excited to talk about some of the things that are happening. As everybody knows, COVID has had a significant impact on the justice system, so we can talk about that as well. But ILJP has really just tried to help really build a reentry system. The fact of the matter is, there are lots of people that have worked on reentry. There's no lack of hard work, but in Illinois, we do not have a coordinated reentry system. And we'll talk about the work, the struggle we are to make that possible. Thank you so much, Floyd, for having me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Castañeda, and I am the Executive Director of Lucha, Latin United Community Housing Association. We are anchored in Humboldt Park, and the word lucha actually means struggle in Spanish. And the reality is that as an organization, we've worked for almost 40 years on a number of issues with which our communities struggle, including the issue of affordable housing. As part of mitigating that, we offer anything from first-time homeowner workshops to actually providing affordable housing. We have 198 units in Westtown, Humboldt Park, and in Chicago. However, in the city of Chicago, they will also tell you, the Department of Housing will say this, any number of advocates will say this, there is a shortage of at least 120,000 units of affordable housing. And you cannot talk about that shortage without talking about why. It's not just about the financing for affordable housing and the complicated ways in which we put regulations on developing affordable housing. It's also about all of the other pieces that are happening along with that. It's about the minimum wage. It's about healthcare. It's about immigration. And it is about whether or not folks are justice involved. It is about all of the other barriers that are added to someone's life, that are part of how a family functions, that are part of every day, that impact whether or not they are able to be housed. At Lucha, we often talk about making sure that affordable housing is truly affordable, that it is something that folks are able to access. And we know that there are regulations put on by the federal government, that there are other ways in which people are often excluded. In Chicago, in Illinois, we experienced the legalization of marijuana at the very beginning of this year. And at the same time, folks with public housing vouchers, even if they were living in private landlords, were still not allowed to be caught essentially in possession of marijuana. So there are often these discrepancies that we as affordable housing providers and advocates often still have to deal with. And I'm really looking forward to being able to talk about that a little bit today. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. So I'm going to start off just by, asking some questions, and y'all feel free to jump in. So these questions are for the panelists. So the first one is going to be, can you all talk a little bit more about the issues and needs related to the reentry population? This is for anyone.
Sure, I can touch base on that. So I work in my role with the Rocky Coalition directly with grassroots leaders. And we did some surveying a couple years ago and found that what folks were asking for the most was access to housing, access to employment, and access to education, as well as mental health and physical health services. And a lot of them also articulated that access needs to come as soon as possible. Once someone is experiencing homelessness or housing instability or the lack of employment, their likelihood of succeeding after that point, their likelihood of recidivism goes up. And we really found that folks need to have access as soon as possible. Those barriers for housing are so grand in the city of Chicago. We've had people sitting on wait lists for 10 years because of their record, because of the limited access to housing. We've had people that aren't able to move, aren't able to be mobile because they finally found access to housing regardless of their record, but no one else will take them. And we really just see the barriers of housing as blocking people's ability to really expand and build their lives. And as we recognize at CCH, housing, we believe, is a human right, and access to housing is a necessary right for everyone, given that we all need shelter and safety. And we really found that utilizing some of these changes is what's going to be super important, especially now in COVID-19, to make sure that people are given a fair chance. The barriers for reentry existed long before COVID, and we also really do see them as an extension of the criminal justice system and the racialized, racist modes that created the system. And we really want to, as we work on dismantling criminal justice and working on criminal justice reform, really taking a deeper look at reentry and recognizing that a lot of barriers to reentry are stemmed in barriers to getting folks their essential needs, and taking a critical look at what that means and how we can fix that to really get people where we want them to go and expect them to go once they are released.
I would just add to sort of Destiny's point to say that I think that what often happens is that there is actually very little in terms of specific laws or specific ordinances that make it a, you know, quote unquote, even playing field. We know that even that is, you know, hard to achieve in a society such as the one we are living in. But things like whether or not you accept someone who has been justice involved, whether or not you accept someone who has, you know, bad credit, whether or not you accept someone who has any number of other barriers, can often be really left up to the discretion of the provider, whether that is an affordable housing provider, like at a larger scale, like we might be, or whether that's a private landlord. And that's among the things that I know that folks have tried to address. There was the Just Housing Initiative that was passed, but it's not enough. There still needs to be more work to be done to make sure that the barriers are not permanent, and that it's not constantly there to make sure that folks are able to access the opportunities that there are, few as they might be.
Yeah, and I just want to add on, I think one of the really important things to think about is first, well, I look at three parts. There are three realities when we're talking about what folks' needs are, where they sit, and what are the issues. You talked about issues too. Three realities here. The first is that there's just a massive amount of people that touch the justice system. I think people kind of, we say that, but I think it's really important to kind of think about it. Just here in the state of Illinois, you know, my boss, Paula Wolf, describes it like this. I think this is a really interesting way of describing it. You know, Chicago is the biggest city in the state of Illinois. The justice involved population, if you gather the people that are in jails and in prisons who are on some type of court supervision, whether it be probation or parole or MSR, sorry, it would be the second largest city in the state of Illinois, right? So it would be Chicago, it would be the justice involved system second, and then Aurora, Rockford, Naperville, and Joliet, right? So we're dealing with an incredibly large population of people, and we have so many different ways of people getting into the justice system and having either criminal records or coming back from incarceration. We have 92 jails in the state of Illinois, right? We have over 20 adult prison facilities. We have juvenile facilities for pre-trial, essentially, detention facilities. We also have a smaller but juvenile prison system. All of that means that there are just a ton of people that are in the justice, that are justice involved. The second thing is, we know that many of these people will come back home, right? So I've heard it cited over 90, 95, 97. If they're not already home on probation or parole or with a criminal record, then essentially they will be coming home. And then third is that housing sits at this biggest need for these individuals. We know that, like Destiny talked about, you know, there are about, you know, I've seen numbers such between 50 and 65% of folks who are unsheltered are with a criminal record. And we know that while Illinois spends billions of dollars, significantly billions of dollars on incarcerating folks, they spend far less money setting those folks up, coming back home, and getting real need addressing their real need with housing sitting in the center. I'll drop something in the chat about a story about a person who talked about them coming home, an individual that we brought to a panel discussion, Brian Harrington, who's a kid who's just coming home and talking about the unique needs he has and housing a part of that. You know, one of the things that we hear about is when somebody comes home, essentially there's a family there. There may be a stress situation because the person was just involved. There may not be a place for them to go. So even if somebody has somebody to come back home to, initially, that kind of can fall apart in the last couple of weeks. So Illinois Justice Project has been working really hard on kind of fixing those systems. But when we're talking about what are the issues and what are the needs, I think it's best described as there are lots of people that are out there that have this need, that most of them will come back home, and that state government has essentially ignored for historically. And there are some great examples of us changing this, ignored this issue and left people to fend for themselves.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all for just centering and grounding us on the issues and needs related to reentry. So now I'd just like to shift, and you all started to talk about it a little bit, but can we talk a little bit more about what are the policy responses, not limited to, I did hear a little something about fair taxes, what's going on at the state level, and this is to all of the panelists.
Sure. So I can talk in a little bit more detail about our public housing access bill. This is a bill that we've been working on within the Rocky Coalition, which, for context, our friends over at Heartland Alliance are part of. Cabrini Green Legal Aid is also part of it, and Community Renewal Society. And we all have been working together on this bill for a couple of years now to really address the issue of access to public housing. Public housing authorities across the state of Illinois have so many different requirements. And on a federal level, the requirements for public housing authorities have changed in recent years to become pretty limited. So on a federal level with HUD, the barriers to public housing are manufacturing methamphetamine in public housing, and if you are on a public sex offender registry for life. Other than that, public housing authorities have complete discretion to change and add on additional barriers to people with records, and we're seeing across the state that those barriers are anywhere between a simple misdemeanor to an arrest to only felony convictions to large felony convictions, and the look back periods are all different. So I can share a link to our ask for people to sign on and endorse, but I can also share the one pager. But basically what this bill looks to do is to increase access to public housing by not requiring people to wait after their incarceration to apply. Like I mentioned before, people are on wait lists for 10 years. So adding additional time to that makes no sense to us. Changing the look back period and limiting it to around 6 months of the date of conviction is what we would like to see, so that only the most relevant crimes are being looked at and relevant convictions are being looked at, as well as convictions that are relevant to a person's ability to successfully comply with their lease. We see a lot of stigma around people with records and people being discriminated for aspects of their record that aren't really aligned, and we also see this in employment, aren't really aligned with what they're applying for. And so we really want to make it clear that those barriers should only exist, or people should only be prevented from housing if there's a reasonable connection to their ability to comply with their lease and their ability to be a good tenant. We know that people need access to housing, and public housing is affordable housing. And when we already have barriers for employment and barriers in all sorts of ways, not only do we need folks to have access to housing in general, but we need them to have access to affordable, sustainable housing that will allow them to move themselves forward. So that's our primary focus this coming session. With COVID-19, we find this even more critical, as I mentioned before. And I'll shift to some other folks.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I think that was all great, Destiny. I think it's important to note two things. I think first, there are counties that are moving forward on this work already. I think of Champaign County, who's being really, really progressive and just not even thinking about criminal records at all. And I know you can explain that more because you are much more of an expert than me on the specifics there. But we know there are counties that are leading the way on this. I think the second thing to note is that the criminal justice system is much more inefficient than we think it is, right? So when we think somebody has a criminal record, we suspect, okay, that means that if you're charged with theft, that means you're a thief. If you're charged with battery, that means you're violent. If you're charged with this, and you're charged with that. Quite frankly, we just rely on those tropes. I'm not sure why, but the fact of the matter is that the criminal justice system, quite frankly, doesn't catch the majority of people that create harm, right? So just because, and quite frankly, the criminal justice system sometimes put labels on people that aren't actually true, right? There are lots of things in the criminal justice system that force people to plead guilty, right? It cannot work unless you don't have trials and you have people pleading guilty, and you also aren't catching people that are doing things. So this idea that a criminal record can kind of tell you what a person is completely broken. Yet and still, we use criminal records to make determinations about who's safe and who's not safe, who can live near us and who can't live near us. And it's really a really broken situation. So we know that counties are able to make this leap and are looking to do better. And I applaud the work of Destiny and others that are trying to bring that model to the entire state, because we know that at least a couple counties in the country, in the state, are doing well. And the world's not burning down, as we know, but I guess we got to prove out.
I'll just say that for Lucha, we are not a policy shop, but we are certainly the folks who are always happy to sign on and happy to be an example of an affordable housing provider and just a housing provider that understands the importance of policies like this that are like across the board that are being held to a standard. As affordable housing providers, the stack of paperwork that we have to turn into any number of folks is a real thick stack, and we're talking about like tons and tons of paperwork that every tenant has to bring in to be certified and to like be allowed to just live in an affordable apartment. And for us, it makes sense that others be held to the same standard and that the standard be the same one across the board, so that folks have this opportunity to access housing as they need it, no matter their background. I think Sharon's point is a really important one, like someone's criminal background, someone's involvement in the justice system, someone's credit, someone's any number of things actually doesn't make any difference in what kind of tenant they're going to be, what kind of neighbor they're going to be, and how they're going to participate in their community. And we believe that strongly.
Thank you all so much. I think that as you all are speaking, this notion of the stigmatization that individuals with criminal records experience is something that is starting to like bleed out into the conversation. So I just like to deepen us in it to talk about advocacy for these group of individuals. What kind of advocacy is happening at the city, local, state, federal levels? Can y'all talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I can start off. We know that the state is and really that, I don't want to sound too negative, right? Because I do think that there are actors in government that are really trying to crack this nut. I know that there is a significant amount of money from the CARES Act that is going from the state government to reentry housing. I want to thank the folks over at the Lieutenant Governor's office for really being a champion of that issue. We know that there are lots of things happening in the county when COVID hit. And the state was at least considering increasing the amount of people that were being released. The JAC, which is the county's essentially criminal justice policy arm, really stepped up and tried to find housing throughout the state. But the fact of the matter is, policy-wise, we haven't gotten folks really involved as much as they can. And I think one of the things that we'll have to think about is a twofold approach, right? So first, working on things on the back end, allowing for criminal records to not be a barrier for someone getting housing and getting the state government involved in actually providing that housing. But I think also thinking about how do we turn off the faucet, right? How do we stop the amount of people, how do we stop the increased amount of people from actually getting criminal records in the first place, right? And I think that we're actually at a unique time in that time for now, because you do have in the state legislator, the Black Caucus stepping up and saying, we want to attack mass incarceration. We want to change the criminal justice system. And I really do think that stuff is really important so that we don't have so many people coming through the system. The fact of the matter is, though, that may not happen. There are only 18 legislators, right? And they need a lot more than 18 folks, right? Or 18 or so. You would throw the Latinx caucus and the progressive caucus in there. That's about 30 people, right? That's about 40 people, right? So it'll be up for folks who don't touch the system as intimately as we'd hope to really make a decision that we're going to kind of cut off the spigot, that we're going to reduce the amount of people with criminal records who are incarcerated so that this impact isn't as hard.
Anyone else?
Oh, yeah. So I would just say it makes me happy to hear that there are more folks interested in justice involved folks and getting them housing. Last week, Rocky was able to have a conversation with Jackie Newman, who sits on the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment, NARO. And they mentioned that in their previous panel and conference that they had this year, that they were looking at how to expand reach to justice involved folks. And I think that it's great that the conversation is starting to happen. My only gripe is that I wish it happened a few years ago so that we would have systems in place that are addressing the needs that COVID has already brought and is likely to bring on. But in addition to that, some of the advocacy that I've really seen happening is that organizations like CCH have been giving out financial assistance. So we were able to give out $500 to 340 households, but unfortunately we had 6,000 people apply. And we're seeing that in other state services and federal services, that just the exponential amount of people applying. You see it, and unemployment is a great example, but people applying for additional financial assistance is something that we need to take a deeper look at, and hopefully more organizations will be able to partner to provide folks with financial assistance. Another thing I would like to add is that in this advocacy, we also need to look at, in helping justice involved folks, another way to help is the preventative work, right? So housing is a unique position in that helping housing and housing for people that are financially insecure is a way to also prevent people from entering the criminal justice system, is a way to give people stability at the outset, or at the beginning, so that the circumstances don't arise that lead people with limited options to be able to survive. We know homelessness is criminalized. We know a lot of you not being able to pay your rent, you can be forced with eviction. That's essentially like a criminalization as well, can influence your ability to access housing in the future. And so by creating a more preventative system that really financially supports the communities that need it the most, we can be tackling this issue from both directions, right? To provide more housing for people that need it, re-entering, but also provide more housing for families, to hopefully provide security. Especially, we do also see this in youth, right? That housing insecurity, homelessness as a homeless youth, is often an avenue that leads people to entering the criminal justice system. So taking a look at housing as not only a response, but also a preventative measure is another way that can help strengthen, I guess, our push for more housing across the state.
Yeah, I think both to Destiny and Sharon's points, we have to realize that housing does not exist in a vacuum. Being justice involved does not exist in a vacuum, right? All of these things are policies, and whatever policies are leading to the lack of affordable housing, whatever policies are leading to the over-involvement of Black and Brown folks in the justice system, things like that, are all part of larger policies. Housing is actually one of the social determinants of health. There are many others. You know, do you have access to a grocery store? What is the minimum wage? All of these are things that we have to connect and we have to talk about together because they become part of those preventative measures. You know, if there is good paying jobs, if you have access to good schools, if you have the same resources as, you know, the wealthiest among you, right? Like, it makes a difference, and it makes a difference into whether or not you are going to be able to remain stably housed. And so we have to, when we talk about whatever policies are specifically aimed at lifting barriers for justice involved folks, we also have to talk about the other policies because it's all connected. Fair tax is connected. This is why organizations like CCH do the work that they do at the larger scale that they do.
Thank you all for that. And I'd be remiss not to just to share, and I shared it in the chat, a link to Harlan Alliance published our annual poverty report, which really focuses on what's called the permanent punishments, more commonly known as collateral consequences of individuals with records, and how, in effect, it follows them throughout their lifetime. And what we're doing is, along with a lot of partnership of a lot of organizations, is something that's really ambitious, and that's more of an omnibus legislation to really tackle all of these, like codified. I think there's about 1,100 like laws on the books that prevent individuals with criminal records from really re-entering society in a just and fair manner. So if you want to know more information about that, I provided the link. And, you know, it's really ambitious work, but if we think about it, like, just to tackle one collateral consequence, you know, it probably take the lifetime of our grandkids and future generations, right, even to get like halfway there, right? So we really have to think more broader and deeper. So I'm glad to hear of all of the good comments that we're having now. So I wanted to also like just illuminate the fact that we're in a pandemic, as you all know, as well as a lot of the social, racial injustice around police brutality, a lot of the unrest that's going on. In regards to that, like, can you all talk about, like, here in Chicago, like what should the city response look like? And talk a little bit more about like what wraparound services that are needed, and how can we like more challenge broader racist systems?
You know, I'll say this: there's political expediency in ignoring people coming back from incarceration. It is. You don't have to do it. So what we saw in the beginning of COVID, we saw lots of people talking about coming back home from incarceration, right? And we saw many of our political leaders being slow on it because there is no real political value in caring for folks that are coming back home. So we've got to basically change that. And I think that it'll take folks around this table expecting something different from their leaders, because quite frankly, the response that we saw, I think at every level, was not representative of the actual problem itself. And it took a long time to get folks kind of the momentum to start doing some of the things that we hoped that they were going to do. For example, when you look at Illinois Department of Corrections, it took a significant amount of time to increase the level amount of people being released, responsibly released from the Department of Corrections as compared to previous years. Now, it happened. And IDOC is very decentralized, and there is like lots of people making decisions, and the leadership on top, I think, is very committed to changing that. But until there is a political motivation for making these changes, things like COVID can really expose the issues. You know, COVID didn't really create many new issues. It just really put a magnifying glass on some of the things that we already saw. So I think almost every stakeholder could be benefiting from a political upheaval, saying that we care about people with criminal records, we care about people who are incarcerated, we want to see them be safe, we want to see them reintegrate in community in a successful way, and we demand that our leaders make that happen. Right now, there's just no political will.
Yeah, so my feedback, I guess, can be for the city of Chicago, the state, the country, the world. But basically, it's that we need to be looking at more long-term solutions. I think that a lot of what the response that we got, even with COVID, even with housing, the issue of housing, is we're getting a lot of short-term responses and short-term solutions like the eviction moratorium and some of the city's work to help the homeless by providing Hotel 166 and some of the on-site like restrooms and things for at encampments where people are living outside homeless. But we need more permanent solutions, and that's why CCH is really looking at creating a change in the Illinois Constitution, as well as making a change in our city to really invest in services that will help people stay housed, get people housed, and also other services that are necessary to address this issue. Criminalization of Black and Brown people is stemmed from a lot of things, but it also has had a detrimental impact on some of our communities. And we really are hoping that the city invest back into those communities, not only in investing in the policing of those communities, as some seem to suggest, but investing in the resources, investing in education, mental health services, food, all sorts of investments can really make a difference in the impact of the criminal justice system on Black and Brown communities. And in addition to that, just really paying attention to what the community is asking for. I think a lot of what the community is screaming and crying for is going unheard because of the logistics and the strategic analysis of getting us where we need to go on a more, I guess, higher level of government level. But really what we're really hoping is that the city listens to the community, that cities in the country listens to the communities and hears what we're saying, and listens to especially people with records. No one knows what they need. No one knows what homeless folks need more than someone that's experiencing homelessness. No one knows what services people that are reentering need more than folks that are reentering. And so what I really appreciate about the reentry community in Chicago is that we take advantage of grassroots leaders and we really engage people with lived experience in creating these policies and these changes. FAB would not exist, HB 206 would not exist without the work of our grassroots leaders and really asking them what they need. And so I hope that given that this crisis, these multiple crises are existing in our communities, that our government and the powers that be really engage the community to find out the best solution, because I really think it's within the community that you'll be able to find it.
I kind of just want to co-sign onto everything that Destiny and Sharon have said, but I guess what I'll add is that what we need to do is demand that our elected officials not be afraid to acknowledge the things that are being cried out for, right? It's not a coincidence that Black and Brown folks are overrepresented in the justice system. It's not a coincidence that Black and Brown communities have been the hardest hit during COVID-19. Therefore, it's not a coincidence that the capture of a murder has spurred on these global protests, not just local, not just national, but globally these protests. It is all related because folks are tired of the lack of investment in their communities. They're tired of all of the ways in the system is set up against them. And we have to be willing to acknowledge that. We have to be willing to acknowledge that this is systemic and that it can't just be a single solution, that it does have to be wraparound solutions. It has to be bigger than just one thing and one policy. It has to all come together. This is not the first time that the murder of a person was captured on film and that it sparked some sort of protest. But the reason that this got so big, I truly believe, is because it happened during this other pandemic, during this other thing that is also attacking Black and brown folks. It matters. And people, and particularly our elected officials, have to be willing to find the political courage to say, like, I acknowledge that. And in acknowledging that, we're going to tackle all of this together, because it's scary. It's scary to go out there and be like, oh God, systemic racism, you know, but we have to be willing to demand that of our elected officials and ask that they stand up, that they do the thing that they were elected to do, which is really do right and do good for their communities.
Yeah, that's what's up. Think all three of y'all really illuminated the fact that race, primarily Black and brown, is criminalized, and also the fact that those that are closest to the problems are the ones that are closest to the solutions. They're the best fit to provide solutions, but often are the furthest away from resources and power. So with that being said, we're in the middle of an election cycle, and we know how important it is to vote and representation, to be able to advocate and create accountability towards elected officials to get to resources and things done in our communities. So what do you all anticipate will be the aftermath of like a COVID, and beyond the short-term relief, as sparingly as it is? I'd like to know y'all thoughts about that.
Can I take one step back? I'm so sorry. I missed something on the question about the city. I think that one of the things that we really saw with this new administration at the city was a building out of an Office of Public Safety that wasn't totally tied to just policing, that had folks that had experiences in providing violence prevention services, folks that understood that mass incarceration isn't just it shouldn't be our lead violence prevention strategy. The hope and thought was that office would be paired with an office of reentry, right? That would bring in people to help coordinate kind of reentry services that are going throughout the city, right? We have lots of folks that are doing reentry services in the city. And one of the biggest problems is that those reentry services are not coordinated. So if you have a quarterback, right, somebody who can actually say, listen, I'm going to take all the things that is going on in the city, and I'm going to make sure that those are paired, right, with the resources coming from the city, resources that may be coming from the state through CARES Act money, and really track positive outcomes, create landmarks, and say we need to get here and make goals and set goals and meet those goals, that we'd be in a much better spot, right? So that's one thing I think the city can do. There have been a lot of things going on, right? So, this isn't beef. This isn't saying, hey, you should have done it all, you should have done it already. But as we move forward, as we kind of pull out of COVID, as we are kind of getting out of the summer violence that kind of, is pushing everybody, that's one of the things I would hope that the city could do, really talk about an Office of Violence Prevention. And I want to make it clear that Amadou Dramé, who's formerly of Safer, or maybe I shouldn't say that, he was moving on, text me and said, Sharon, why aren't you talking about this? So this is not my unique thought. This is Amadou telling me, hey, you got to do this, and he's completely right. And I apologize, Amadou, for not mentioning that.
Thanks, Sharon. Anyone else?
I think sort of picking up on your question, Floyd, I would say that the thing that we all have to be prepared for is the idea that whatever world we thought we were living in January will never be the same world that we will experience. there is going to be what life was pre-COVID, then there's like during COVID, whatever that looks like, and then it's going to be a question of like what does the new world order look like after this. And I think that for any of our vulnerable populations, whether you're talking about folks who are undocumented, folks who are justice involved or anything, like we have to really keep in mind like what essentially new barriers are being created after this. Because the truth of the matter is that in moments like this, like the systemic supremacy that exists continues to create new barriers and find new ways. This is what we have found throughout history, both long history and short history, that something happens, something shifts, and like new barriers are created. And so I think part of what has to be done, and I think this goes to both Destiny and Sharon's points from earlier, is really listening to the folks on the ground. Like what is happening? What are folks telling you? What are the people who are justice involved saying is important for the justice involved community, and really listening to all of that. And I think that'll be true post-COVID, that'll be true post whatever political thing happens in November. Like we have to make sure that we're listening so that we can continue to advocate and we can continue to make sure that we're not falling back into the same traps of just, you know, putting a different face on the same barriers from before.
I can just quickly add, I think that if I'm being optimistic, the aftermath is that more people will recognize the importance of long-term solutions for housing, and we will have everything passed and everyone will be able to get the services they need. In a pessimistic look, looking forward, before COVID, nearly 80,000 people were experiencing homelessness in the city of Chicago alone. The estimates of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless also include people that are doubled up, so people that are sleeping on couches of other people or in temporary housing solutions. But knowing that those numbers are going to increase and have already increased, given the current employment crisis, given the numbers of people applying for financial assistance to help with housing. And so looking forward, we really need more activism and more people aligning with requiring the city, requiring the state, requiring the federal government to invest in its people and to keep people afloat. This is a time that is unprecedented, and a lot of people are going to be experiencing housing instability that might not have ever otherwise experienced it but for COVID-19. And that is on top of the people that are already were experiencing financial instability beforehand. And so we're really hoping that people, not only in Chicago, not only in the state of Illinois, but across the state, I see a lot of you from, or across the country, sorry, I see a lot of you from all over the country, that you're really taking a look into the homeless services that you have, into the reentry services that you have, and encouraging more support in those areas, because those are going to be the people in your communities that need help the most. Thanks.
Well, what was the question one more time? I'm so sorry.
Oh, no worries. We were just talking about gaps in the current system, coordination after release. So, you know, one thing that I always like to say, you know, being fully transparent, I'm someone with a criminal record. And one thing I realized early on was that our reentry starts way before someone is released. You know, we have to start preparing, you know, so in a personal way, in case management and engaging that individual, but also systems have to prepare well in advance, right? So, you know, I just wanted to, you know, give you all an opportunity to talk about any like other gaps or in regards to coordination between like all levels, you know, and with all stakeholders, if there's anything else you all wanted to share.
Well, like I said before, I'm sorry to jump in here, but I can't help it. You know, we don't have a system of reentry in the state of Illinois that's integrated here, either the city or the state. So I just want to shout out, you know, good folks at the McCormick Foundation that have helped us, along with MacArthur and some other folks, sponsor a reentry pilot program. It's between us and TAS, SAFER and Illinois Department of Corrections to help identify people before they're actually coming out. And then once they get out, offer some 6 months to 12 months housing, have a caseworker available to those folks that can kind of make sure those 6 months to 12 months are there. It's a small pilot now, but what we're hoping is that this will be a model that will be adopted by the state so that we can get states in the business of punishing, states in the business of incarcerating, states in the business of making sure people are removed from society. State also needs to be in the business of making sure when they come back that those folks have a successful reentry process, not just because that person is owed it, but the whole community is owed it, right? Look at the maps that have been created around where people come back to, right? People come back to the same communities, basically, that they were moved from, and lots of the issues that we see, they're coming back to the same economic issues, right? So if people are ensuring that these folks are reentering successfully, then I think we're going to help build up some communities that have been historically and intentionally left behind. So I don't know if it's as a big issue as are there gaps. I think the bigger issue, do we have systems that are motivated to actually create an entire timeline of successful reentry, right? There are only gaps because there's not a person at the top or a system at the top that are ensuring that things are successful. And that's what we're trying to build. So I thank our foundation partners and our service partners for helping us try to dream that up.
Another thing that I would add to that in terms of gaps, would I just say that the system needs to recognize that the communities that are likely being pulled, or the communities that are being pulled through the criminal justice systems, are experiencing a collective trauma. Systemic racism has traumatized a lot of communities, traumatized us as a country in general, but that's another story. But traumatized a lot of communities, and that trauma is only exacerbated by entrance and experience in the criminal justice system. And that trauma affects people for their entire lives. And so taking into consideration all of the effects of someone going through this process, the communities that individuals come from, the experience of the criminal justice system, and then the reentry, and connecting all of those dots and providing services to people as they need it is really important. Some of our grassroots leaders have articulated that while a lot of these services have been beneficial, these services aren't provided in a way that individuals, as I mentioned before, with lived experience are saying that they need. Some people don't feel comfortable being shoved into a course in a class. Some people don't want to do this. And so by forcing people, it doesn't really allow them to grow either. And so we're really hoping that by increasing and changing the way that we are giving programming within prisons and jails, while the way that we're giving programming and assistance to people in education and schools in certain communities and all communities, and recognizing that people with criminal justice involvement are human beings that have their own level of progress and ability to deal with the interactions and the things that happen in their lives. By doing that and creating a more personalized system, and not just having a system and having a program for the sake of having a program, we can really address people and allow people to make the changes that are necessary to continue to move forward. And so I say that to say that some of the gaps are that people aren't receiving the services that they need. People may be receiving services that are greatly structured for a particular type of person, but not what they need. And we see this a lot with people that have experienced and have mental health trauma. And we see this a lot with women being pushed into programs that are structured around the needs of men. And people with children are not given services that are helpful to them because the services are wrapped around individuals, and I can go on and on. But really taking a look at how we're providing services for people, and are we doing the best that we can to address the people where they are to get them to be the most successful that they can become. Yeah.
I'll share something that as I hear Destiny speak, which is that some time back, some weeks back during COVID, we got a call from our local alderman because he'd gotten a call from one of the neighbors of what is going to one day be our future home office. And for right now, it's an empty building. It has a parking lot, an open, accessible parking lot in the back. And the neighbor had called the alderman to complain because there was a car back there, you know, and we are an affordable housing organization. So we go back there, you know, and we're like, okay, you know, and it turns out that there were a couple of folks living in their car. They had parked their car in this lot. And our thing was like, well, who do we call? What do we do in this moment? And that's how we're affordable housing advocates. Like, there are certain things we know, right? You know, it's like, all right, let's see if CCH has some ideas, maybe Heartland, you know, like, let's make some calls. But there just weren't enough resources. And like, there wasn't a whole lot we could do for these folks, you know? And they were making the neighbors nervous, and we didn't want the neighbors to do the thing that neighbors will often do in these moments, which is call the cops, right? Because you don't know you don't know if this person already has some sort of justice involvement, and like, it's just going to escalate this and make it worse, or, you know, maybe they don't, and regardless, calling the cops escalates this and makes it worse. And so for us, we often see this, and we talk about this even for the resident services that we offer, that there has to be something else. The answer can't always be calling the cops, because you are just further exacerbating the problem in the justice system, and you're further making it so people become justice involved, and in ways that can be, like Destiny said, incredibly traumatic for the whole community, for the family, for the person, and everything else. And so what we are often thinking about as an organization is like, what else is there out there? What else can we advocate for? And for us, this is really the biggest gap. Like, all of the times that the cops get called, that really, like, any number of other services, any number of other people could have solved if they existed. And in our heads, they exist, right? It's like the folks that it's like, there's someone else that can intervene. There's some other person that, you know, can handle a DV call or a mental health call, but they're not out there. And so, you know, we're stuck in this, between this rock and this hard place, because we know that this isn't the right thing, but we also don't have access to this imaginary right thing that we've dreamed up. And so I really, I want to work, and, you know, as an organization, we want to work towards making that a reality as well. So that, and again, going back to the point from the very beginning, how do we like prevent folks from becoming even just as involved in the first place?
Man, thank you all. This has been some amazing discussion. I'm going to pivot to the question and answer. I see that we have several questions. So let's start with, okay. So this question is for Destiny, and it is, in making recommendation for public housing policy change, how do you decide to recommend a 6-month look back since the date of conviction rather than the date since release? Does that make sense? I think this is the public housing access bill that you.
Yeah. So the reason that we had a look back period of 6 months from the date of conviction is really to take a look at the most relevant and most recent crimes. When someone, we seem to forget that the harm occurs, well, the harm often occurs before conviction, but conviction is when someone is being punished, and the punishment comes after that. And so when we're looking at release, we essentially view release as the time in which a person has actually serve their time, a time in which a person is now, by all means, prepared to enter the community, re-enter the community, and start fresh with their conviction, with their record behind them. And so the reason that we look at the date of conviction is this is when the court and the city or the state or federal government has decided that you are being punished, and that from that date then on, your punishment will continue. But also, this is when we're really looking at, have you been able to, you know, change your life from that point forward. And so when we look at release, some people are convicted 25 years ago or 10 years ago, and they serve their time for 10 years. But when we look at the date of release, we don't take into consideration that 10 years has gone by, a decade has gone by for a person to change and for a person to really grow into that themselves and be able to be a good tenant. And when we're looking at that aspect, that's why we really started to look at the date of conviction and looking at it in a different way. I hope that helps. If there's any additional questions on that, I can include more.
Okay, another question I have is, okay, so here's a question. This individual is asking, this attendee is saying, my organization is working on creating housing opportunities for people who've been convicted of sex offenses. We view this as one of the biggest convictions that imposes biggest housing barriers and can keep people homeless and unstably housed. This is to all the panelists. Do you have any advice for housing people with particularly stigmatizing records? So I guess such as sex offense or other.
Yeah, so yes, people convicted of sex offenses are some of the most prohibited across everywhere in terms of getting access to housing. We see it with homelessness, that some of the people that have experienced homelessness for the longest amount of time are people that are on sex offender registries. We also see ridiculous requirements that if an individual is housed, their reporting requirements are less frequent than if they're experiencing homelessness, which when they're experiencing homelessness, they're probably less likely to be able to go and report, but that's a whole other thing. So yeah, recommendations for that is one, creating a space where people with sex offenses can be housed separately from everyone else. I don't necessarily agree that they should be segregated from everyone else, but I also know that in a lot of spaces there's a lot of regulation, and so just increasing the availability of housing specifically for people with sex offenses is important, but also recognizing and kind of working with some of those community groups that are working against the stigma of sex offenses and working against registry requirements. A lot of people, not a lot, but a significant number of people on sex offense registries have crimes that are not related in sexual to any sexual offense, which is weird. And also people on sex offenses that are people look at sex offense and think rape, they think child molestation, they think the extreme of sex offenses, when some people may be required to register for things that are not as, I guess, dramatic or intense as what we assume. And so really taking a look and maybe even creating campaigns that focus on what is a sex offense, listing what sex offenses are, and letting the community recognize that not all of these will put me in danger. Also acknowledging and looking at the statistics that sex offenses and some of the most extreme sex offenses do not just randomly happen to someone's neighbor, and really taking away some of those stigmatizations, and also recognizing the need for more trauma and mental health support for people on sex offense registries and people that have been convicted of that. There's a lot of research on trauma and sex offense convictions and offenses. And so taking a deeper look at that is also really important. And also just providing good services. People with sex offenses experience a really heavy level of trauma, or either prior or as a result of their conviction.
So I think this would be a great space here to talk about the folk on the ground that are doing the work. I think the first folks that I think about are the Chicago 400. This question may have come from somebody from the Chicago 400 because they are so active. But you know, this is a group of people that I think are very, very, very focused on telling the true stories of folks who have been convicted of a sex offense. I think Destiny is right that there's a variety of offense within that label, and how our current policy doesn't keep anybody safe, right? It's not good for those men that are accused of those crimes, and it's not good for the community, right, who wants to be safe, right? There are things like sex registries and restrictions on where people can live actually don't help keep us safe, but they're also not rooted in actual reality. There have been lots of studies, there have been lots of uh, studies on this issue that talks about how these policies don't actually work. The Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority put together a task force that I think was in 2016 that was comprised of lots of people in law enforcement, not just bleeding heart liberals that are trying to get everybody out of jail. And they found that people who are convicted of sex offenses are not more likely to be convicted of another sex offense compared to some other offense. It talked about how low the reoffense rate was, but it also talked about how some of the things that we do just aren't really correct, right? So I love to drop that in the link and for people to look at that task force report and also look up the Chicago 400. But the reality of the situation is, in this space, we are much more focused on promoting policies that make us feel good, as opposed to promoting policies that actually help keep us safe. So we are kind of okay with thinking that, oh, these people are dangerous, these people are crazy, these people, if they're going to be let out, they're going to, cause all type of damage, and we don't even really care about what the truth of that is. And that's another political question, right? But I would support the work of the Chicago 400, and there are other groups. I know the Coalition for Homeless has supported some legislation around relaxing some of those policies. And I've got experience with it as well. I was a former public defender for a good bit of time. I would have clients, who were convicted in the 80s of offense. Maybe they served a year for some offense that wasn't like the worst offenses, and they would get they would have decades and decades of violations, separate criminal offenses, because they couldn't report, right? Because they would have to go to 31st in Michigan, and they'd have to report every 3 days or every week or every month, depending upon their circumstances. And because they didn't have the transportation, or they had some issues going on, they kept getting rearrested and being sent back to Illinois Department of Corrections. And we also know at the Illinois Department of Corrections, there are a lot of people who can't be placed. So we have literally over 1,000 people, I believe, and some people maybe correct me if I'm wrong, that have nowhere to go, that they've served their time, and because of all the restrictions, they aren't let out. And there's likely going to be some legal issues with that as well. So I would suggest folks look up the Chicago 400. I would suggest folks read this report and really approach this issue with an open mind.
Thank you. And see, we have one other question, which is, do you see and this is for any other panelists, do you see the fair chance housing ordinances as a good model? And what are good ways to enforce these efforts? Do you see the fair chance housing ordinance as a good model? What are good ways to enforce?
I can sort of start by just saying that, I think fair chance, I think, is probably similar to the same idea that what happened in Cook County around the Just Housing Initiative, and just that idea that someone's justice involvement shouldn't preclude them from being able to access affordable housing. I think that those models, for me, are certainly a great place to start. Again, coming from a space where, as an affordable housing provider, there are some things that some standards we are held to versus some standards that we can choose. And as long as people can choose, there will often be some sort of barrier and some sort of discrimination. And so the thing I like about ordinances and these sort of models is that idea that there is a level at which folks are being held accountable for having these opportunities available to anyone. Again, for all of the reasons that we've stated, right? Not just that, justice involvement can mean a new number of things, right? Some of it unfair and not fair because it's all so systemic and so race-based, but because everyone deserves an opportunity to be safely housed. The thing that Lucha has been repeating over and over again since the beginning of COVID is that you can't shelter without a home. You can't shelter in place without a home. And, in March, the governor of Illinois said, shelter in place. And this is so much of what has been a huge problem for folks, because when you can't access housing because it's not affordable, because of whatever justice involvement you may have had, because of your credit, because it's just like not in the district that you need to be in order for your kid to attend the same school that you want them to attend, like all of these things are all barriers. And so I think certainly I believe in anything that can hold people to the same standard and say, like, folks deserve the opportunity to be housed and to be judged on only their ability to pay the rent.
All right, I have another question. So here's one. How do you meaningfully engage and include folks that are personally impacted in these conversations without putting the onus on them to justify and educate people on some of these changes, especially in hostile spaces?
Yeah, I can touch on this. So it's a unique position, right? I think right now we're talking a lot about Black Lives Matter. We're talking a lot about the experiences of BIPOC. And in that, a lot of people have made it clear that it's not on the onus of Black and brown people to educate white people or other people on racism and the goings on in the world. And so kind of paralleling that, while we need to recognize that it's not on people that are justice involved to educate all of us, we also need to recognize that justice involved folks are not given a space nearly anywhere to actually like engage and express what they need and what's necessary to make change. And so while we don't want to put the onus on them, we also do want to make sure that we're creating a space for justice involved folks to speak. A lot of our grassroots leaders are very apprehensive about speaking up at first, very apprehensive about them being seen as a person in power, as a person who has a voice, who is able to speak on a level and articulate policy change and all of these things like that. But we really recognize that as we encourage that, that our grassroots leaders are like way better than all of us at articulating the needs of the community. And so it's really about building that confidence, I think, but also recognizing that we need to take some burden off of them, recognizing that we are here to make it, to give grassroots leaders, to give people with lived experience a voice and to support them in making the changes through the connections that we have to make their lives better and to make the lives of the community better. And so I would encourage all engagement with people with lived experience in whatever you do. If you're working on policies for food stamps, talk to people that are on food stamps. And so talk to people that have lived experience and acknowledge that you are there as an extension and a resource for them to get what they want to get done. And so, but also recognize that you're also there if you're going to be supporting them, support them in a way that also encourages them to reach out even when it's difficult. Those hostile spaces sometimes come in Springfield, and really supporting our grassroots leaders and saying, I know that it feels like you're not listened to. I know that people are judging, you feel the judgment that's coming in, but we're here to support you. And we're here as a way to show that that judgment is incorrect, and really just providing that confidence in that space to work alongside them as equals. And it really has changed the work and allowed us to get a lot done.
Yeah, if I could just, I would add to that. I've been on both sides as far as someone who's had to use my narrative as a person with a criminal record to help advance advocacy and policies and legislation, and also realizing and also being on the policy, quote unquote, expert on certain things. And what I can say is that we live in a very credentialed society, right? But no one, formal credentialing through education or what have you, but no one really lifts up the fact that lived experience is a form of credentialing that needs to be legitimized, right? And that their narrative is very valuable. And when you pair, like, for example, an individual with a lived experience, a criminal background, and a particular issue, and you have a policy person who's able to articulate that to like elected officials and other audiences, it becomes a development opportunity for both parties, right? And we have to document and start to socialize those experiences to help make them normal, like amongst our society. I think that we've done a lot of good work. I know everyone here on the panel, as well as other people with other organizations, have done a lot of good work in that way. And I just think we need to amplify and highlight that a little more. Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, I can add something to it. I just think, it's interesting, and, I think we should be listening to Floyd about his personal experience. That's the best way of like thinking about this issue. I'll say, as a person who doesn't have lived criminal experience, but is in a position to help people advocate for their issues, our issues. We need to be looking at, like you said, this is an asset, right? Because I was like a public defender, like I'm better at thinking and understanding issues around bond policy, right? That experience is an asset, and people just understand that, and it's helped me get to where I'm at today, right? I don't think about it as an asset all the time, right? But on the other side, what I've seen is like tokenization, and like that's bad too, right? I've seen it like in legislator meetings. I've seen it in all types of spaces where we basically tell people to tap dance. We're like, this person had a criminal record, tap dance for us. And like that's just checking a box, right? That's something that's gross. That's to me, that's just as gross as like not including folks, right? So if we just understand as an asset, if we just understand like this person is better, has something in their background that helps us get to where we're going to go, then I think we're in a better place than either just ignoring folks and not empowering them, or just like, checking a box and making people do stuff. And I think there's some organizations here in Chicago that are doing a really good job of that. And there's some organizations in Chicago that aren't doing such a good job of that on both sides. And we also constantly need to be checking each other, right? I get checked all the time, right? From, people on this chat, saying like, listen, what are you doing on this? You're having this conversation, do you have the right people with the right credentials? So keeping us accountable is a really good point as well.
Thank you. So I'm gonna do something that I love to do. Give folks 5 minutes of their time and life back. So we're wrapping up now. I want to thank all the panelists. Y'all awesome rock stars. Keep doing what y'all doing. Look forward to working in collaboration with each and every one of you all. I want to thank Debbie and Chandra for hosting this and providing me with the opportunity to just join in with you all, and to all of the attendees who attended. If you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to Chandra and Debbie, and we can make the connections. So with that being said, I'm going to say goodbye to everyone, and thank you all for attending. Take care, everyone.